They're removing your name from every drawing," Lydia said into the speakerphone, smiling at the investors as if she were presenting a gift. "Effective today. I'm appointing a creative director who can translate my vision without the baggage of old habits." They laughed at the word baggage. They clapped when she announced a rebrand that erased my signature from the homes I designed. They expected tears and a scene. They expected me to argue, to beg, to ask why my cousin would cut my name out of the company I helped build with my hands and my time. I did none of that. My shoulders stayed level. My gaze didn't move. I asked if there was anything else on the agenda. There was. What they did not know was that her announcement was the last piece I needed. The removal itself would prove authorship and intent when placed beside what I had already saved. I stood while the assistant slid a cardboard box onto the table, as if I were being processed out of a retail job. The boardroom smelled like stale coffee and metal chairs. But I said nothing about the indignity. Lydia repeated the words fresh eyes and market fit to impress two men who wore expensive watches and copied each other's phrases. I listened as they applauded her for decisive leadership. I thought about the first house we built in that abandoned lot near the river. The one I sketched on scrap paper after a 14-hour shift because we couldn't afford proper tracing pads then. She called that era quaint. I called it the beginning. They asked me to hand over my laptop. I did. They asked for my building access card. I did. Then Lydia put her hand on mine like a television host consoling a guest and said, "No hard feelings. Family first." I remembered the weekend I missed my friend's wedding because we had deadlines, and I slept on the office floor to finish the foundation details so the inspector wouldn't flag us. I had paid for that rush permit with my own emergency fund because she promised to reimburse me next month. Next month never came. I did not bring that up. I did not list sacrifices. I let her perform kindness for the room. She told the board how I struggled to adapt to the new brand voice. The truth was simpler. I refused to put fake wood on a frame that deserved real lumber. I refused to swap measured airflow for what a consultant called lifestyle language. I refused to lie. She called it negativity. They called it rigidity. I called it work. While I spent nights checking spans, so roofs would not sag, she spent nights at investor dinners telling stories about how she taught me modern design. While I adjusted beam schedules to keep costs down for buyers, she posted about minimalism and tagged restaurants that would not take my calls when we needed donations for the community open house. She took my quiet and stamped it as weakness. She was wrong. The assistant asked if I also wanted to box my framed photographs from the hall. I said I would leave them up. I looked confused, as if I were too proud to accept what was happening. I wasn't proud. I was documenting the moment. I wanted the wall to be exactly as it was when the plaque came down, because the gap left by my name would be useful later. Public erasure is still a record. You date it. You keep the program from the day they do it. You write down who was clapping. Lydia clicked to the next slide, renderings of the same houses. My houses, with my signature scrubbed like a stain. She said the homes would now be inspired by my family legacy, which meant she could steal without naming it theft. She handed the investors a glossy press release that told them she had been the guiding mind from the beginning. I recognized my own captions rewritten to sound like advertising. I recognized the floor plans down to the missing plug I had argued to keep near the entry closet. I recognized my hand in every doorway. I also recognized the limit of arguing with someone who thinks the limit never applies to her. One of the investors asked if I wanted to say a few words. I did. I said, "Thank you for the years we built together." I said, "I am grateful for every crew who poured concrete in cold wind and every neighbor who let us measure their yard lines when city records were wrong. I said, "Good luck with your next phase." I did not look at Lydia when I said next. She wanted eye contact for the victory photo. I gave her a profile. She took it as indifference. It was preparation. Indifference does not gather receipts. Préparation does. While they organized a photo opportunity, I thought about a memory I never told anyone. The night the bank almost pulled our line, I sold the only ring I had from my grandmother to cover an invoice for reclaimed joists so we wouldn't miss framing day. I didn't wear jewelry after that because I didn't want to explain where it went. Lydia called those joists invisible cost in a meeting 2 weeks later and asked me to prioritize optics. I prioritized stability. She took a picture on a ladder for the newsletter and captioned it with the word grit. She had never lifted a joist in her life. They wanted my passwords. I opened my mouth and closed it. "I will write them down for IT," I said. "You'll have what you need by the end of the hour." Lydia smiled as if she had negotiated a win. She hadn't. She didn't know the files that mattered were never stored where she believed they were. She didn't know that what I kept was not documents in a cloud but proof of sequence. She didn't know sequence proves origin in ways that slogans cannot touch. I carried the box past the bullpen where juniors whispered into coffee cups. I didn't stop at my old desk. I stopped at the hallway where the first framed newspaper article hung. In the photo, I was standing behind Lydia, slightly out of focus, because I hated photos and asked to be moved to the edge. That decision made it easy to crop me out of later press. It also made those early prints valuable, because you can see where a body used to be when someone redraws history with a rough hand. I stood still. I let the feeling pass through. I moved on. At the elevator, the new creative director stepped out and introduced herself with a bright voice and a rehearsed handshake. She said she admired my early work and hoped I would be generous with legacy notes. She was not my enemy. She was a prop. Lydia needed a mascot to show change. I told the young woman I wished her courage. She looked at me like I was speaking another language. Maybe I was. The language of last chances is quiet. It doesn't photograph well. I put the box in my car and sat without turning the key. I thought about the way Lydia had transformed a family project into a trophy case, and how I fed it because I didn't want Thanksgiving to turn into a courtroom. I told myself peace mattered more than credit. I told myself I could live without my name, as long as the houses stood true. Then she took the name and the houses. That is where patience ends. That is where silence becomes a plan. I drove home and lined the box items on the table. The meeting program with the agenda and the timestamp. The printed press release with its small boast about founder vision. The company newsletter from the first year that shows who signed off on which drawing. A photograph of a wall before the plaque came down. Date written in pen on the back. I placed them without drama. I wrote the date again on an envelope. I put the items inside. I sealed it. There is a difference between angry collecting and calm archiving. Angry collecting makes you sloppy. Calm archiving makes you undeniable. I remembered the nights Lydia called to say a client dinner ran late and asked me to be a team player and pick up paint samples for her presentation in the morning. I went, even when the store was about to close, even when the clerk rolled his eyes at the list. I paid with my card and told the office manager to categorize it under miscellaneous because I didn't want the fight about petty cash. While I loaded the car, Lydia sent me photos of dessert and said I should learn to network. I drove samples across town and slept 2 hours. She presented them as if she had chosen each one. If you keep doing that long enough, you begin to wonder if sleep is selfish. It is not. It is basic. I learned that too late. The phone lit up with messages from staff who used to stand in sawdust with me. Some said they were shocked. Some said they saw it coming. One said she had to pretend to be excited because Lydia asked her to clap first to start the applause. I told them to do what they needed to keep their jobs. I told them not to take sides. I told them I was fine. My voice stayed level. My pulse stayed even. I put the phone face down and wrote 3 names on a legal pad. The inspector who always cared about real ventilation. The community lender who took a chance on us when the big bank would not. And the neighborhood organizer who could fill a room on a weeknight. I did not call them. Not yet. Timing is a stud you can hang weight from when walls are thin. In the evening, I went to the storage unit where I kept the boxes no one knows about. Not secrets. Just records. Early sketches with dates. Printouts with my initials in pencil because I never trusted the server after it corrupted a file on a different project years ago. Receipts I paid when we didn't have enough to release a shipment. A stack of emails that I printed the day they arrived because I needed to look at them on paper to think straight when stakes were high. People will call that paranoid. I call it a habit built from being the one who gets blamed when something goes wrong. I brought home what I needed. I left the rest. I locked the door twice. My cousin texted a photo from the boardroom dinner with the caption, "To new chapters." She added a heart. I stared at the heart for a long time and thought about the simple rule I set for myself after the night I sold the ring. I would never again finance someone else's performance. I typed, "Congratulations," and put the phone down. Then I took out a notebook and wrote 1 sentence I knew I could keep. "You will not get to write my ending for me." The next morning, a junior architect forwarded me a calendar invite for a press event scheduled for the following week. It listed a founder talk with Lydia and a heritage segment that would feature the origin story. I read the draft remarks attached and saw lines I wrote years ago, rearranged to turn her into the pioneer. I let the anger rise and fall. I wrote the date and time on a sticky note and pressed it inside the notebook cover. Public events are useful. They gather the people who need to hear the truth in one place. They put microphones on tables. They record. I walked to the river where the first house still stood with its simple face and honest lines. A neighbor waved from the porch. She didn't ask about the firing because she didn't know yet. She asked if I had time to look at a hairline crack near the back stairs. I knelt and ran my fingers along the edge and explained what to watch for, how to know if it's movement or just a line in the finish. She said, "Thank you for making something solid." I said, "It's what I do." Then I stood and felt the kind of tired that isn't solved by sleep. I went home and opened the notebook again. I wrote out a simple sequence. Not revenge. Sequence. The date they erased my name. The photo of the wall. The newsletter with my signature. The program from the press event scheduled for next week. The community lender's original letter welcoming us to the pilot program with my name as the project lead. One document after another, placed in order, so a person who did not know us could understand without needing me in the room. That is what matters. Not speeches. Not style. Proof that speaks in plain words. When Lydia called that night, she used a sweet tone and told me the board wanted to feature me in a founder tribute video that would run at the end of the event, to honor your contributions without confusing the new leadership message. I listened to the language. Tribute. Without confusion. End of the event. She was trying to put me on a shelf and close the door. I said, "Send me the cut when it's ready." She said, "Of course." She did not ask what I was working on. She assumed it was healing. It wasn't. It was arranging. I did not tell her I had kept the original design brief in my handwriting with her notes in the margin that say I don't get why airflow matters here next to the diagram that later became her favorite talking point. I did not tell her I had a printed email from the first investor declining her pitch and approving mine, with a subject line that uses my name and the phrase approved to proceed. I did not tell her I had a photo of the wall with my plaque still uptaken that very morning, with a date written on the back. I did not tell her anything. There is a time to explain. There is a time to let someone talk themselves off a cliff while you stand on level ground and wait for gravity. I slept well. Not because I felt peace. Because the lines were straight. The plan was simple. Let her talk. Let her host a room she believes she owns. Let her tell the story the way she always tells it. Loud and wrong. Then let the record correct her. One paper at a time. In front of the same people she trained to clap on cue. I woke before sunrise and printed the draft run of show she sent overnight. I circled the minute where the heritage segment would begin. I underlined the exact phrase where she would claim origin. I wrote in the margin, "Here." Then I closed the notebook and made coffee. My hands were steady. My voice, when I spoke to myself to rehearse, stayed even. The anger had nothing left to do. The work would do the rest. They took my name off a wall. They believed that was an ending. It was a date stamp. It was the first slide in a sequence. It was the moment the story began to write itself without their help. And when the room is full next week, I will speak once, briefly, and only to place the record where it belongs. After that, I won't need to speak at all. The week after my dismissal stretched like a blueprint unrolled across the floor, every line exposed, every error visible. The investors began resharing Lydia's posts with captions like visionary leadership, and the comments under them multiplied. I watched them, not because I cared about flattery, but because every post left a timestamp. Time makes theft traceable. Emails from old clients trickled into my personal inbox. They had seen the announcement. One wrote, "You'll always be the real architect behind those homes." Another said, "She can't replace experience with a smile." I didn't answer. Gratitude would look like gossip. Silence kept me clean. At night, memories pushed through the quiet. I thought about the first year when we had no office. Just a shed behind my house with an unstable internet connection. I'd draft until my fingers ached, then drive an hour to print at a copy shop because we couldn't afford a plotter. Lydia never learned to plot. She said the ink smell gave her headaches. I didn't argue. I printed. I delivered. I corrected field notes. I apologized when the contractor misunderstood her vague instructions. I did everything that kept the walls upright while she took the credit that paid for her clothes. She was not cruel at first. She was careless. Cruelty came later, when attention taught her that charm can erase contribution. When journalists called, she said, "I managed logistics instead of calling me co-founder." When the local paper wrote about our first design award, she told them I was on-site support. When I asked why, she said, "You hate interviews." I'm protecting you. I believed her because I wanted to. That is what loyalty does. It edits reality until the edges no longer cut. The betrayal sharpened slowly. It wasn't one moment. It was hundreds. The afternoon she signed my drawings without reading them. The night she canceled a meeting I'd prepared for 6 weeks so she could fly to a retreat. The time she used my father's death as an excuse for her missed deadlines, telling the board Mara's been unstable since the funeral. I found that email months later while searching for a permit code. I remember staring at the sentence until the words stopped being words and became noise. I saved the email in a folder titled Clarifications. I had carried those small humiliations like bricks, stacking them neatly in my head. That's how buildings fall too much weight. No release. But when Lydia removed my name from the company website, that was demolition, not maintenance. It freed me. I could build again from clean ground. A message arrived from a junior engineer named Dev, who still worked inside. She's hosting a press demo Thursday. He wrote. They're calling it the New Era Reveal. She said you're sending a quote for the tribute video. I replied, I already did. The quote was 3 sentences long. We built homes to stand longer than egos. They wouldn't use it, but it would sit in their inbox like a silent nail waiting to catch fabric. I spent that morning sorting through an old external drive. Every early invoice, every drawing revision, every time stamp from the pilot project lived there. I opened one folder, marked Stage 1. The first file bore the original project title, Hail Kent Eco Series. My initials tagged each layer. I opened the metadata panel and smiled creation date. 5 years ago, 2 months before Lydia officially joined. Data is unromantic. It tells no story. It only tells what happened and when. When Lydia arrived at my house that afternoon, she pretended it was a friendly check-in. She wore her usual perfume, the kind that announces arrival before the knock. I was in the area, she said. We should talk before Thursday. The board's nervous, you might say something impulsive. Impulsive, I asked. You know what I mean, she said. You've always had trouble letting go of credit. I gestured toward the living room. She didn't sit. Lydia, I said, I have nothing to say that would hurt you if it weren't already true. She rolled her eyes. Don't make this sentimental. You'll get your tribute. Maybe even a small stipend, if you sign a release form. Let's end cleanly. I looked at her and saw something I hadn't before. Not just arrogance, but fear disguised as composure. She was rehearsing for her downfall without realizing it. Send the form, I said. I'll review it. She smiled, relieved, and left. The smile was her tell. It meant she believed me harmless again. She would stop checking the mirror. After she left, I printed the metadata page from the drive and slipped it into the envelope with the other documents. Then I opened the clarifications folder and printed that email about my father. Her words, Mara's been unstable since the funeral, looked uglier in ink. That line would read differently in front of investors. Cruelty always looks clinical when exposed in daylight. At dinner, I thought about the years that email represented. My father's illness, the loans I took to keep the business alive, the unpaid weekends at build sites. Every time Lydia said we, she meant me. Every time she said vision, she meant budget. Every time she said innovation, she meant Instagram. That was her language: pretend to build, perform to belong. My language was evidence. The next day, Dev sent another message. Internal memo says your designs were just conceptual inspiration. They're removing you from the original patent reference before filing the renewal. That line hit harder than the firing. Removing a name from a plaque is cosmetic. Removing it from a patent is surgical. It changes history. I asked him for a copy of the draft. He hesitated, then sent it. I printed the header: Lydia listed as sole creator. Description revised. My name gone. At the bottom, digital trace still showed original file author M. Kent. That was all I needed. Computers remember what humans deny. The same afternoon, the community lender called. I heard about the split, she said. Lydia wants to refinance the next phase under her own name. She says you've stepped back. I have, I said. For now. She sighed. That's a shame. You were the reason we took the risk. You still have your documentation. Yes, I said. Good, she replied. Keep it safe. I hung up and wrote her name next to witnesses. By midweek, I had assembled enough to reconstruct 5 years of revision history. Each file contained hidden details, draft notes, initials, embedded creation logs. No one in marketing would ever think to look there. Lydia relied on visibility. I relied on structure. That's the difference between posing as a builder and being one. On Thursday, she texted me a photo of the event hall. Looks perfect, she wrote. The hall looked exactly like every rented success: white banners, rented smiles, and lighting soft enough to blur flaws. She didn't know perfection is brittle. Touch it, and it shatters cleanly. That evening, Dev sent a message. She rehearsed your story on stage. Word for word. Said she sketched the pilot concept in a coffee shop with her grandfather's notebook. Everyone clapped. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I printed the message, date and time, and added it to the envelope. The next morning, a courier delivered the release form Lydia mentioned. It stated that I waived any claim to intellectual property associated with the initial concept series. It also promised a one-time consultation fee for my participation in the tribute video. I read it twice. It was greed written in legal tone. I signed nothing. I made a copy and stored it beside the email about my father. Together they told a pattern exploitation disguised as family. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed every loop of sacrifice, every dollar I spent, every promise she broke, every smile that hid another subtraction. I saw myself hauling blueprints in the rain, fixing a cracked step at midnight, standing in front of city inspectors who doubted my license because Lydia said I was just handling logistics. Each image landed like a nail through wood, aligning one truth after another. By dawn, the fury had cooled to focus. The event was 2 days away. She wanted applause. I wanted a record. Both would happen in the same room. I ironed my black blazer, printed 2 extra copies of the documents, and placed them in separate folders. One went into my bag. One stayed in the drawer at home. Evidence should always have a twin. The phone rang again before noon. It was the journalist who'd covered our early projects. I heard you're doing a tribute appearance. Off the record, why now? Because, I said, sometimes you have to let people build their own stage before you take back the microphone. He laughed. Cryptic as ever. I'll see you there. I hung up. The laughter didn't bother me. It meant someone else would have a camera. It meant documentation. The one thing Lydia couldn't script. As I packed the folder, I thought again about that first blueprint. The one drawn by hand. The pencil lines slightly uneven. It wasn't perfect. It was proof. I folded the copy carefully and slid it on top. In 48 hours, Lydia would introduce herself as founder, visionary, and architect. In 49 hours, she would meet the word correction in public form. I would not shout. I would not interrupt. I would let her finish every sentence. Because silence, timed right, becomes the loudest form of truth. The event hall smelled like polished wood and coffee, though I never touched either. I arrived early, before the photographers, before Lydia's team finished their banners. Preparation isn't about showing up ready, it's about being there before control arrives. The crew assumed I was still part of logistics. They nodded as I walked past. That mistake worked in my favor. I found the backstage area and saw the teleprompter feed scrolling on a monitor. My words. Rearranged again. The sentence I wrote years ago, "Design is trust made visible," had become her slogan. She didn't understand that the statement was literal. Trust leaves marks you can measure in ink and beam alignment. Lies don't last through load tests. I slipped into a side room reserved for staff. The stage manager was busy arguing with a technician about lighting. No one noticed me remove a folded page from my bag and tape it beneath the lectern base. It wasn't sabotage. It was record placement. The page contained the date and author metadata from the original design files, printed in plain text. Cameras wouldn't see it. But the moment her speech began, the prompter operator would find that page when they adjusted the screen height. Documentation works even when no one knows it's happening. I walked back into the main hall and took a seat in the third row. Around me, investors talked about expansions and partnerships. They spoke in numbers, not in materials. They never touched the wood their profits came from. Lydia moved among them, shaking hands, laughing. Every gesture rehearsed. I studied her rhythm. When she smiled too wide, it meant she was nervous. When she touched her necklace, it meant she was lying. She touched it often. A woman sat beside me, Carol from the lender's office. "You look calm," she whispered. "Construction teaches you that panic breaks structure." I said. She smiled. "You still have everything." "Yes," I said. "And everyone who matters will see it today." Lydia's assistant took the podium to begin the program. "Welcome to the new era of Hale Designs," she said. "Our founder will share how she turned a dream into reality." Applause filled the room. The assistant's voice trembled. Maybe she already knew the truth but needed the paycheck. Lydia walked to the stage under a spotlight bright enough to bleach memory. 5 years ago, she began. I sat in a cafe sketching an idea that became these homes. The crowd nodded. I didn't. I watched the teleprompter operator adjust the height. Pause. Then pick up the folded page I had taped. His eyes moved across the lines, confused, then focused. He looked toward the control booth. I saw him hold the sheet up to the stage manager. The manager read it and whispered to someone on the headset. The flow on the prompter froze mid-sentence. Lydia stumbled on a word. "Sketching. An idea," she repeated, voice tightening. The operator restarted the feed. The document traveled hand to hand toward the booth where the journalist I'd spoken to earlier waited. I watched the movement of truth without moving myself. Lydia continued her story, unaware of the silent current building in the back rows. She mentioned family support, legacy, vision. I kept count. Each phrase would be matched later against an exhibit number. When her speech ended, applause rose again. The moderator stepped up to begin the Q&A. That was my cue. I raised my hand. The moderator smiled politely. "We have a question from the floor," she said. "I'm Mara Kent," I said, Standing. Heads turned. Phones lifted. Lydia's face froze for half a breath. I'd like to ask about authorship. The moderator hesitated. We'll allow one question. Thank you, I said. Could you confirm whether the initial patent draft filed in 2019 listed your name as author, and whether that document's metadata still shows a creation date before your official involvement? The room shifted. Words like metadata and authorship carry weight among people who sign contracts for a living. Lydia laughed lightly. This event is about vision, not paperwork. That's what I thought, I said, and sat down. The silence that followed was not polite. It was awareness settling like dust. The journalist stood and slipped out of the room, phone already raised to record. By the time the next speaker began, the prompter operator had sent the image of the metadata page to his supervisor. Within 20 minutes, a photo of it was circulating in the same investor chat where Lydia's quotes had been celebrated all week. I stayed until the lights dimmed for the final video montage. My tribute clip appeared at the end. As promised, they hadn't edited it. My face appeared on the screen. Voice calm. We built homes to stand longer than egos. Applause started uncertainly, then fractured. Lydia's expression did not move. She understood finally what structure failure feels like, the slow cracking before collapse. After the event, Carol joined me outside near the loading dock. That was brave, she said. It was documentation. I replied. Do you want to go public? She asked. I don't have to, I said. It already is. My phone buzzed messages from Dev, from the journalist, from others inside. The metadata page had leaked online with the caption, "The real architect behind Hale Designs." I didn't post or comment. Silence again. It would do more damage than defense. That evening, Lydia called. Her voice was different, thin, tight, trying to find authority. You've made a mistake, she said. Which one? I asked. You violated confidentiality. I didn't share anything, not already public. You did that when you projected my sentence on your stage. She breathed sharply. You think this is over? It's documented, I said, and hung up. The following morning, the investor group issued a statement announcing a temporary leadership review. That phrase means removal without the word. Her assistant removed her name from the press page by noon. The emails from clients doubled, then tripled. Everyone said the same thing. We knew it was you. In the quiet of my house, I went through the envelope one more time. I added the event program with the timestamp circled. Evidence grows like a building foundation first, then frame, then roof. Once it's complete, you don't argue with it, you walk inside. 2 days later, Carol forwarded a note from the lender's board. They wanted to reopen discussions with me about future projects. They used the phrase, "under your leadership." I read it twice before answering. I wrote, "Let's talk next week." I wanted a weekend of stillness first. That Sunday, I drove back to the pilot house by the river. The neighbor greeted me again. I saw the news, she said. Took them long enough to notice. Truth travels slow, I said. But it doesn't get lost. I touched the wall near the door, feeling the solid weight beneath the paint. Proof isn't about words or applause. It's the structure that stays upright when everything decorative falls away. That night, Lydia's assistant sent a message. I'm sorry. We all knew. I hope you're okay. I replied, I'm fine. Be careful with what you sign. The next morning, a courier dropped off a large envelope addressed from the company's legal team. Inside was an NDA and a small check labeled consultation fee. I took a pen, wrote void across it, scanned the page, and sent it back. Paper, again, tells the truth when people won't. By evening, every professional site had updated its credits. My name returned to the designs. Lydia's disappeared. Justice doesn't shout. It lists names correctly. The phone rang one last time that night. It was Dev. She cleared her desk. He said quietly. They told her to take a break. They said investors want you on the call next week. Thank you, I said. He hesitated. Are you coming back? I'm rebuilding, I said. Not returning. He understood. Good night, Mara. Good night. When I hung up, I stood by the window and looked at the river lights reflecting off the houses I had designed. They didn't care who signed the drawings. They stood the same. That was enough for now. The week after the event felt different. Calls no longer came from unknown numbers demanding clarification. They came from reporters asking for confirmation. Investors stopped using Lydia's name in correspondence. The company's official statement arrived on Tuesday morning, effective immediately. Lydia Hale has stepped down from her role as CEO of Hale Designs. No explanation followed. They didn't need one. I didn't celebrate. I archived the message and opened the new folder where all my proof now lived. Inside were 5 years of receipts, drawings, emails, and signatures. The folder wasn't about revenge. It was an audit of what survival looks like. Bevendesday. The lender invited me to lead the relaunch. They wanted to restore trust. They called it continuity. I accepted under one condition: every contract must carry attribution lines for everyone involved, from drafter to crew. No more erasures disguised as teamwork. They agreed. Lydia tried to contact me 3 times that week. The first call went unanswered. The second arrived late at night. I let it ring. The third came through a text. You win. I hope you're happy. I typed a reply and deleted it. Winning wasn't the word for what happened. Correction was. I didn't send anything. Silence had been my clearest language all along. At the new office, the walls were bare, waiting for plans. Dev joined the team again. Carol visited with contract papers. The journalist stopped by to take one more photo. I stood beside the table instead of behind it this time. They asked me to smile. I didn't need to force it. We launched the new phase that month, under a different name, Foundation Works. The first project used the same layout as the pilot home, the one Lydia called too modest. The crews built it exactly as drawn. No, decorative edits. When the city inspector signed off, he said, "It's solid." That word meant more than any award. News about Lydia faded fast. She deleted her accounts. A rumor spread that she moved abroad. In every mention, she was former CEO. Titles shrink when truth expands. I kept my old office chair, the one with a crack in the armrest. It reminded me what breaks under pressure and what doesn't. I made no speeches. I made floor plans. People returned because structure speaks louder than slogans. On the first anniversary of the reversal, Carol brought a framed headline from that day's paper, Architect's proof ends corporate scandal. She asked where to hang it. Nowhere, I said. We know. We stored it in a cabinet with the old records. History doesn't need display, it needs preservation. Late that evening, I went back to the river where it all started. The houses glowed in soft light, still steady, still real. I sat on the porch steps of the pilot home. The wood was weathered but strong. I ran my hand over the grain lines, each one a timeline of decisions made under pressure. The air was still. I thought of my father, of the ring I sold, of every night I believed silence was surrender. It wasn't. Silence was strategy. For the first time, I allowed myself to exhale without counting what it cost. Lydia's name no longer mattered. The proof lived on paper, in permits, in beams. No one could rewrite that again. I whispered to the dark. It's done. The words didn't echo. They landed. Subscribe for more shocking, real-life-inspired stories. Like. Share and subscribe for more dramatic, twist-filled short stories. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update.